Hello, it's now possible to connect your CyberArk identity flows to your self-hosted PAM. This is done through API Gateway. I'm going to show you how to configure, but the first thing I want to show you is I'm going to run this flow. It is first of all using the APIs to log in to the Vault, and then it gets a token that is generated and it queries the Vault to get the accounts. So I'm going to run the flow just to show you the end results first, and then we'll see how to configure this. Perfect. Let's take a look at the logs, and we can see that it was successful for the login portion. And then we can also see that it returned the accounts in the Vault. So this is just a quick example on how to do this. Let's see how we can achieve this. Okay, the first thing we need to do is to use Bruno, Postman, or other API tool and make sure that we are able to connect to the Vault internally. So in this case, I'm going to be connecting to using the logon. And the logon we are going to pass as authentication, basic authentication. I'm using the Vault login, the CyberArk logon, and I'm passing the administrator and the password. And when I run this, it's going to return to me a token. Okay. Then I copy this token, and if I have something like get users, for example, or other API, I am going to pass in the headers. I need to have the content type, application JSON, and I have to have the authorization, and then I paste that authorization that I got in the previous call over here. And under authentication, I leave it no authentication because we're going to be using the header to send that token. There you go. So it's working correctly. This is one of the things that we have to do. The other thing that we have to do is we need to log in to our PVWA. And this is done here, access restrictions. So you go to administration, configuration options, access restriction, and make sure you add the tenant URL to allow connectivity from flows. So that concludes what we have to do on the Vault itself. Okay, so here I have a link to the API documentation for the Vault. We first did a logon, and then we went and did something like get users. Next, we need to open a support ticket and request this early access feature API gateway to be enabled to your tenant. So you need to request this. If you're seeing this video later and you don't have this note anymore, it means it is general availability, but right now it's early access. So I already did this. When you do this, you are going to have in here CyberArk Identity Web Apps in the Identity Administration. You are going to have a new custom app called API. So if you don't see this, it's because this feature hasn't been enabled for your tenant and you need to request it. You click Add and it will add an API Gateway application. You can change the name, you can change the description, you can change the logo if you wish. Next, put the URL, and that's the internal URL for your application. And then you are going to enable the API Gateway by going to API Gateway and clicking here. Now, the first time you do this, it's going to take a little bit to take effect. So you are not going to be able to start testing right away because there are some DNS changes that we have to do in the background. I'm going to use the generated URL, and I suggest you do this as well for the initial tests. It's also possible to change and use your own URL, but for this use case, you probably don't want that your own URL, internal URL, to be public outside of the organization, so most likely this is okay. Take note of this URL, copy it, because you are going to need to use. Next, you need to click Add to add a API key. So you're going to give it a name, add a description, and REST APIs, you can either use part of the URL like this, or you can use dot asterisk, how it's described in the documentation over here. So you can use dot asterisk to allow all API calls, or you can restrict to whatever API calls you are going to be needing here. I'm using something very generic. You can also restrict by IP and ranges, and this is using the secure zones from CyberArk Identity. The first time you do that, you are going to get a API key. Save it somewhere because we are going to need that API key to authenticate with the app gateway. Next, I'm leaving past the requested URL to the application without the coding, and I'm checking that, and I'm also checking rewrite generated external URL to the internal URL and requests and responses. For more information, you can look at the documentation and the description of those options. And you can choose what connectors you want to choose for this communication. In this case, I'm just having one, so I'm going to leave any, and I'm going to click test connection. Okay. So another requirement that you might not have is to install the identity connector. So you're going to need to install the identity connector. And if you need information about that, or if you haven't done, go back to your documentation and look at deploy the identity connector. So here it has information about the requirements and how to deploy the identity connector. I'm not going to go over on how to do that because it's pretty common and we don't need another video on the identity connector. So once you did that, that's all you need to do here and the identity. Now we are going to go to your flows portal. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give a name to this flow. You can give it a title. And you can give a description. You can use different things here. You can also add tags. So we're just testing the connection. I'm going to use this create to add an API call. And now for host name, we need to go back to our API and we go into API gateway and copy this URL here to the host name. Next, the base URL, I'm going to leave it the same, and the path is the same path that we used when we tested from the self-host. The method is post for this one. The content type is application JSON here, so we'll leave this like this. And in map, we need to add a body. We have a body parameter. And what you can do is you can go to Bruno and get the information here that it had on the body and paste here and click save. and the type is there you go. Now you have your username that you're going to be using, and you can add the real password here. After you do this, we also need to add a new one, which we'll call X CyberArk access token, and it's a string, and it has to be a header. Then you click here, and here is where you're going to add that authorization token that you got from the API. So the first time that you created this, you got an authorization token, and you're going to add it here. So once you did this, save it and run it. You need to do this first time to check if you can log in. Okay, I figured it out why. So when you copy the URL, when you add the URL here in settings, don't add HTTPS. So once you copy, you just want everything that it comes after the column. Okay, so let's try again. Let's save, let's run. Okay, let's take a look at the results this time. And this time is successful. And on the response, you got the token that you're going to need to do the authentication. So this is inside the response and the body. Next, we are going to add the second API call. And once again, we are going to be using the same host name that we used before. And this time I'm going to be using this accounts. And in this case, the method is get. The application type is, again, JSON. And notice that I'm not using the authentication, the authorization here, because we are going to be passing that. We are going to be passing that information. Now here, what we need to do is we need to add, give it a name like authorization. We are going to the type. We are going to say it's a header. Authorization. This is the authorization from self-hosted PAM. So it's a header and perfect. And over here, we are going to request from the body, and you need to put an example here. And this example, what you need to do is go back to the previous one that you run, get the response, copy the response, put the response as example, save it. Now you are able to map, and what you want is this. What you want is this. Click on the bodies, because this is going to have that response, and so every time you run it's a different one, but this is what you are going to want. Next, you need to add a new one that is also going to be the header, and the name is for every call we need to pass this parameter, and this is because this is going to be that authentication that we used. And the value you can also automate. You can put this in a parameter, so you don't need to update every time. So probably that that will be better. So you can have a custom value that you can call, for example, API gateway authentication. And then you want to copy that value, because ideally you can copy that value once, and then we put it here. And so now we could even change, we can also change here. And when we map, instead of putting manually here, we can map to this custom value. So now if this ever change, you only change in one place. So let's try this. Let's save and let's run. And then let's take a look at the logs. This one was successful as expected, and this one was successful as well, and we got the information back. So this is an example of how to use CyberArk Identity API Gateway to allow you to use flows to connect to your self-hosted vault inside your network. I hope this was useful. Thank you and have a great day.